Welcome to our spring lecture in the Future of the Research Library Speaker Series. I want to thank Terry Owen and Jerry Foodie for helping organize the series. And our speaker today is Dan Hazen of Harvard College. And his talk is titled, Terps in Our Beds, Building Meaningful Library Relationships in a Multi-Partner World. Dan Hazen assumed his current post as Associate Librarian of Harvard College for Collection Development in January 2005. He preceded this assignment with a term as head of the Collection Development Department in Harvard's Widener Library. Still earlier, he spent about 14 years there as librarian for Latin America, Spain, and Portugal. Hazen holds a doctorate in Latin American history from Yale University and a master's in library science from Simmons College. He previously served as Latin American bibliographer at Cornell, and then at the University of California at Berkeley. He also served a 2-year term as the part-time director of the Global Resources Network, a cooperative initiative then co-sponsored by the Association of American Universities and the Association of Research Libraries. Dan has taught and conducted extended research in Latin America and has also served as library consultant to the Lampadia Foundation, now defunct, for its activities in Argentina, Brazil, and Chile. He directs the Harvard-based Mellon-funded program for Latin American libraries and archives, which to date has provided almost $3 million in small grants to support tightly defined projects for preservation and access within the region. I personally had the privilege of working recently with Dan. He authored an extremely interesting and timely chapter titled Area Studies, Librarianship, and Interdisciplinarity, Globalizing, the Long Tail, and the Cloud, in a book I recently co-edited for ACRL's Publication and Librarianship series titled Interdisciplinarity and Academic Libraries. So I would like you to join me in welcoming Dan Hazen today.
Thank you. So there is a handout, and there's a little remnant over there on the table in the corner. And I caught a bunch of people, but not everyone. So if you don't have it, this is your opportunity to grab a handout. While we're doing that, I want to thank you all for being out on a day like today, setting up a day like today so I can feel like I'm at home. And it's great to see everyone here. Our most, show of hands, how many people come from this particular McElvin library? Pretty much everybody. How many people are in the local library system here at College Park? Okay, and is there anybody that's not? Great, okay. For a minute, I thought we were going to have a sort of small enough critical mass that we would reorganize into a circle or something like that and have that sort of a conversation. We aren't, but I do see that everyone is carefully avoiding the front rows. So I'm probably going to talk from here, which means that I won't have a mic, so if it becomes difficult to hear me, please let me know. Or move up towards the front. We've got a series of options here. The final sort of preliminary thing is thanks especially for coming out with such a cheesily titled talk. Daniel was asking for a title for the presentation on the day when we had like 25 inches of snow in Boston, and I was shoveling and sort of lamenting my fate, and this is what resulted from that. So, you know, who knows what the title would have been on a different day. When we're talking about cooperation and these sorts of things, which is the nominal area of concern for this talk, for this discussion, it really is backing into what almost any conversation about research libraries has to do today, which is kind of the existential question of do we deserve to exist? Why do we deserve to exist? what is the purpose, what is the function of a research library within an academic setting, or more generally in the panorama of information services and organizations these days. We got Google. We've got intellectual property regimes that limit what we can do in ways that are new for us. It used to be you could buy a physical object and do whatever you wanted with it. Now we're sort of negotiating an information world that's fundamentally different, that's disintermediated, where it's not apparent necessarily that research libraries play an essential role in that. We have discovery and access systems that were certainly useful for a time that may or may not be sort of up to what needs to be happening right now. The opening paragraph on this sort of précis, I'm going to read it. Current research library orthodoxy has it that we cannot hope on our own to provide locally the collections and perhaps services that will meet all of our users' needs. We must instead look to cooperative and consortial arrangements to fill the gap. However, we have yet to fully explore the background and conditions of this multivalent landscape. Matters of activities and scope, overlapping cooperative commitments, inadequate assessment plans, uncertain business models, and sustainability and adaptability all demand attention. So this is going to talk about those in general and with regard to Maryland. Unpacking all of those sort of terms in there raises questions that go beyond what the sort of face value of the questions, of the propositions, and of this talk is all about, to the really sort of underlying fundamental issues of what is the purpose of a research library. The sort of propositions that are attempting just underneath that to unpack what that sort of initial assertion might mean, all are susceptible to some very kind of fundamental thinking, rethinking challenges. So what I'm hoping we can do, among other things, is work through some of those questions. In general, also as they apply or might apply in the setting of Maryland, or any other specific research library. It's obviously kind of a huge topic. What I'm imagining that we could do is spend, half an hour, 45 minutes talking about the general proposition of what drives research libraries, the information world, universities, scholarship, the academic enterprise today, and how does that sort of shape the parameters of what research libraries can be doing, should be doing, and how they position themselves in that environment. And then have a discussion about those points and about these sort of points, questions, issues, assertions that are on the handout, and then slide over into a second half or segment of the presentation, which will talk more specifically about cooperation, cooperative programs, how that all works. One of the drivers for cooperation as the sort of entry point into this conversation about research libraries is the Maryland joining the CIC. So what's that going to mean? What could that mean for the libraries? What could that mean for the campus more generally? How does that sort of affect what could be happening here? Maryland is already a member of ASERL, Association of Southeast Research Libraries. ASERL is beginning to do interesting things. CIC arguably has been doing more interesting things longer. So there's, I think, some really exciting possibilities to think about looking at that. But also the larger question, which I alluded to at the beginning, does even that sort of scale matter? Is that enough to sort of vitalize, energize, make research libraries able to perform the functions that we assume that they will, should, can do within the emerging environment? So, any initial reactions, responses? Is this all wrong? Do you want to hear something else? Shall we go home and look at the snow? If not, let's start rolling along. I'm going to be doing a lot of talking, especially at the beginning, but please come in with sort of questions, glosses, interpretations, comments, whatever you have to sort of fill out the thing. I don't want to just be standing up here for the next hour and a half. When you do an environmental scan of the sort of research library context these days, there are probably there are probably any number, but there are 4 dimensions that particularly stick out as perhaps being worth thinking about. So there are trends in information, there are changes in institutions, there are organizational structures, there are expectations, there's scholarship and how scholarship and user needs are evolving, and there's the marketplace. They all interact, they intersect in numerous kinds of ways, but they all have fundamentally changed the nature of what research libraries do and how they have to go and hope to go about doing that. And this is regardless of size, it's regardless of location, it's regardless of any other consideration. As I suggest, the digital turn is one of the principal features in the change that's going on, so that digital objects, they're, you know, the usual thing. They're ubiquitous, anybody can play, they're sort of up-to-date, malleable in ways that we aren't used to with fixed sort of physical objects. The other side of that is they're ubiquitous, but access is often susceptible or actually controlled by rights issues that don't come into play in the same way for analog collections. They're malleable. That raises questions of authenticity, of sort of verifying that what you're dealing with is what you think it is, that it's something that's trustworthy, that it's real. Anybody can play. That means that, again, in another dimension, the notion of authority, you know, I can get on and sort of write about evolution or the Middle East or anything I want to and sort of represent myself as the authority in that, and who's going to know how to do that. And there's a funny way in which the internet world, the digital world, sort of flattens information in a couple of respects. So one thing is you do a search, you do a Google search or something, and you'll get whatever, anything that sort of relates to that term, to that search query that you put forward. It could be a snippet out of a book. It could be an essay by, you know, some authoritative policy-making group. It could be my blog post from yesterday. It could be just about anything. And they all come across as having the same sort of value, importance, significance, substance to them. So there's a flattening where it's difficult to sort of assert what, or understand what the authority, what the power is that's underlying anything. And that sort of fundamentally changes the way that the discovery and the meaning of intermediated activities sort of reference help, the stuff that libraries do. Works within the community, within people who are searching out digital information. When we get to the digital turn is complemented by globalization as a phenomenon. So once upon a time, if you were running a research library or running an academic operation, the evidence upon which new scholarship and teaching and learning was based tended to be the secondary sources, the sort of products of past scholarship that had been tidied up into bundles and journal articles, into monographs, into these sorts of things that were authoritative, definitive representations of what the reality that was somewhere in back of you. And for both scholars who were going to undertake new research, their starting point was to understand what people had already done. You sort of stand on people's shoulders was the analogy. You know, the new a scholar. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, or I'm a giant on the shoulders of midgets, or however it works. But the fundamental notion was that there's this sort of cumulative record of scholarship, and that's what you need to be able to do new research, to make new discoveries. That then sort of shaped research library collections, where the expectation was you would have that record of scholarship, or as much of it as your institution could relate to in terms of academic programs and in terms of budget capacity. So you'd get all the US university press books, or you'd get think tanks and university press academic books from all over the place, or the segment of trade publications that represented sort of codified, digested scholarship. And the same thing with journals. That changes with globalization in a couple ways. One of which is that all of a sudden the players sort of mushroom. So it matters what scholars in India are saying, or what people in China are saying. And scholarship, as globalization happens, is also energizing the research, institutional, educational capacities in all of those countries. So the massive stuff that we have to contend with just to be capturing the record of scholarship is, orders of magnitude larger than what it used to be, when we could sort of think, well, we get the English language stuff, we get the North America, Western Europe, and that's the world that's thinking. That's the world we need to pay attention to when we're doing research. The other phenomenon with globalization is unleashing this torrent, this also has to do with changes in the nature of scholarship, of raw data, of sort of evidence. So it's not good enough these days just to have what people have done with the evidence, both in our pedagogy and in our research patterns, and in the way we think about what matters. Having that raw data at our disposal is increasingly important. So how do we contend with that? Globalization and these changes in the scholarly models for scholarship mean that we're all of a sudden dependent on having or providing access to masses of stuff that go just spectacularly beyond what was traditionally considered as adequate for the library to collect, sufficient for the library to be providing its services to users and advancing local scholarship, teaching, learning, all these sorts of things. One of the anecdotes from Harvard was when I first started there, we still had a gigantic card catalog. And when you went through the cards, not often, but every once in a while, you would find an LC proof card that didn't have a local call number on it. So, what's this about? Why would that be there? Who made a goof? Tracing back, the assumption back in those days, and this would be like the 40s, 50s, was that anything that was identified out of the LC card sets as being sort of a scholarly work is something that, of course, we would get. So, we could get sort of one efficiency ahead of its time. We could get a jump up on the whole process by putting that card in the card catalog when we had it in our hands, and just waiting for the book to come in. And when the book came in, we'd sort of do little details like putting in the call number. Every once in a while, the book didn't come in, so you'd have these sort of orphan cards that were just sort of there for decoration. But the assumption was that the record of scholarship was what we were collecting, that we had sufficient resources and know-how and sort of gumption to go out and capture that record of scholarship, and that was what we were about. There were occasional sort of forays into other kinds of more exotic stuff, but that was icing on the cake. The cake was providing this fundamental core sort of literature. That's not how it works for libraries. That's not how it works for the production and output and processing of information. That's not how it works for research scholarships in universities anymore. So this is a long, convoluted way of saying that the world has exploded on us, both in terms of analog output, in terms of digital output, in terms of the expectation of geographic scale, scope, in terms of the kinds of materials that we need to be providing to users in order to be able to fulfill our missions in support of scholarship and local academies. In organizational structures, and sort of the expectations of institutions. What we're seeing, and this has been implicit for a long time, but it's becoming more explicit these days, are things like accountability and assessment and understanding what the utility of any organization is. So for universities, you're really expensive. We cost a lot of money. Are we delivering products that sort of warrant those expenses, whether they be tuition or the budgets that are coming out of states and other things, or the endowments that we're, some of these places like Harvard, we're richer than God. And why? Do we deserve to have that money? Are we using it well? Is this a social function that can be sort of justified? How do we sort of explain ourselves and sort of demonstrate that what we are providing society merits the kind of investment the society makes in us, or that our students and their parents make in us, or whoever it is. So a whole emphasis on accountability, and people are coming at that from all sorts of different directions, but it's one of the trends. In research libraries, we're still flailing around to come up with metrics that are going to sort of demonstrate what accountability might be in sort of credible ways. There's been a lot of stuff about return on investment, and it's this really tortured, convoluted kind of reasoning about how much time people spend looking up citations, and they save this much time, and they can do this much more, and these kinds of things. And it doesn't convince much of anybody, I don't think. It shouldn't convince much of anybody, certainly. But we don't have much that's better to work with. Impact factors are susceptible to all sorts of gaming. They apply in some fields and disciplines better than in others. Demonstrating the utility of research libraries to teaching, to learning, to research is a tough proposition. And it's something that we're expected to be able to produce. So there's a lot of community effort on that, but we haven't cracked that yet. And it's something that is a problem for us. Sustainability is a kind of related concept of our programs and our activities. There are lots of things that we're doing, or that we want to do, or that we think we should be doing, where we don't know how they're going to play out over time in terms of whether we can afford them. Yeah. So, whole lot of difficult, provocative kinds of expectations that are out there in the world that we need to be thinking about. We think about users, clients, customers, students, these sorts of things. And we don't necessarily know how to understand them as they exist right now, or as they may exist going forward. In research libraries, it's sort of the norm to say our users present and future, and that sort of justifies just-in-case buying, because 100 years from now, somebody's going to stumble across this and it's going to be exactly what they wanted, and weren't we prescient to have sort of anticipated that need and sort of got the stuff, and boy, are we good. So we aren't going to be around 100 years from now, but we sort of extrapolate that from the folks 100 years back who did these wonderful things. And that's a legitimate kind of argument. But it's, again, if you're looking for accountability, if you're looking ways to justify and assess that, it's a tough one to play. It's difficult to sort of assert how that exactly is going to play out. Another kind of thing, when we're thinking of users, we typically say, well, we've got the people out the sort of shuttered windows, and we've got the faculty, students, staff, researchers who come here. As universities move into MOOCs and these sort of international, global, in some cases, campuses all over the place, in some cases, a virtual presence that goes all over the place, who are our users? And what are their expectations? How do we relate to them? Either as members of a community or as sort of recipients of services that we're providing in conjunction with programs of teaching and learning. We haven't really nailed down what that means for libraries supporting MOOCs, and massive open online courses, these things that have hundreds of thousands of registrants, sometimes all over the place. What is a reasonable expectation of the kinds of services we provide, both in terms of, these are the readings that go along with the course that somebody's teaching online, but also if there are sort of more important fundamental kinds of services that would be associated with a research library, what we provide for users that are on site. How far do we go down that road, and how do we sort of manage those kinds of activities? Way up in the air. A third trend has to do with, or set of factors has to do with the way universities and organizations are working right now. And one of them is at the same time as they're sort of exploding out into a larger potential user constituency audience realm, there's massive disinvestment by states and sort of government agencies in universities in general and in libraries, research libraries in particular. And this is pretty much across the board. When you look at library budgets and support from universities since the crash, since 2008, 2009, almost everybody is down. You look at the ARL numbers or any of these things. And in some cases, the drops have been precipitous. At the University of California system, the collections budgets have dropped by 25% and more in a number of those places. At the same time, there are new expectations for research libraries. So all of the data mandates, if you're doing research these days and it's funded by federal agencies, but increasingly by other agencies as well, you researcher need to be saving the data, your own data, but also data on a larger scale, and that needs to go somewhere, and it needs to be curated, and it needs to be made available, and how's that going to happen? It's a huge expense, huge expectation, technically challenging as well as operationally challenging. How do you deliver that stuff back out in useful ways to other people? It used to be that many universities could get by saying something fuzzy about, well, we're preparing citizens for the future, or we're preparing the leaders of the future. Over there, we're doing research which is going to sort of energize the economy of the world, make things better for everybody in the future. More and more on top of that, or superseding all of that stuff, is we're going to get people that get jobs. We're training people to be employees somewhere or other. We're going to sort of vitalize the economy by creating the workforce of the 21st century. That's maybe legitimate, but it's different from saying we're preparing people who are going to be good, sort of fully participating citizens, able to take their place in a society that's increasingly complex or something like that. So that's another one of these conundrums that we have to sort of figure out. If the university is all about making people who can hold down a job, then what is the library service that sort of supports that exercise look like? And is it the library service that we've sort of privileged and put most of our resources and emphasis on over time? When we get then within the confines of the university, how is scholarship changing? And there are a number of ways where this is a long evolutionary pattern, and it's nothing particularly new here. But the sort of buzzword of interdisciplinarity, there's an insistence, and our little book exercise was sort of playing to this, that the world of the future is interdisciplinary. That sounds good. That certainly is true to a degree. It also feels like, in many cases, when you dig down into what's actually going on, it's me doing my thing in my discipline, and I'm working next to and talking to somebody who's doing their thing with their disciplinary understandings, and somehow over the top of it, we're putting a little sort of common umbrella that makes it sound like we're doing something fundamentally different. And maybe there will be parts of the results that are fundamentally different, but a lot of it is just sort of repackaging and representing what we've been doing. Not by any means all of it, but there's, it feels like something that is in danger of having been overhyped and being overhyped. And whether or not that matters in terms of what we do isn't quite clear. But there's an awful lot of buzz and a lot of activity that may or may not be fully warranted. Another area that I think is catching up with the hype is sort of computational scholarship, machine-assisted scholarship, digital humanities, big data kinds of research, where there's some very interesting stuff going on. It hasn't matured yet, so it still is taking shape. A lot of what people are turning out now is sort of uncharitably stated sort of parlor tricks using computerized stuff. So when you look at the n-gram exercises against HathiTrust or the Google Books database or something like that, so that's how has word usage changed over time, or how have concepts sort of evolved over time. And you can, plug something in and get these really cute, sort of interesting little results, which may or may not sort of have any validity beyond sort of the most superficial kind of sort of audience appeal. So, and that's the kind of stuff that it may sort of burrow down, dig down on itself, and we may have something that's more meaningful going forward. And other people are doing kinds of digital scholarship that's more interesting. The capability of mobilizing people to sort of comment on and add value to whatever some phenomenon is. I remember growing up in something or other when this was going on, and a scholar had talked about it, but here's what I saw, and here's what I remember, and here's what my grandfather used to do, or something like that. And that's a kind of capacity that sort of merges into digital scholarship that's arguably going to turn into something more interesting as time goes on, and it already in some cases is doing it. You have in your library report, there was the professor who's working on the growth of Black New York City, of Harlem and things like that, and is using, among other things, as I understand it, sort of testimonials from people who are talking about, what it was like back in those days. A third area is an increasing emphasis on applied scholarship or value-added scholarship, doing things that aren't just sort of for the research ideal in and of itself, but are going to turn into money through licensing arrangements, through applications, through practical, tangible things. This again is not entirely new to universities. The sort of applied mechanics kind of aspect of what land-grant universities in particular have always done has lent itself to that. The partnerships out of Silicon Valley, out of MIT, out of some of the technical schools has always lent itself to that. But this is a big business now across the board. So medical innovations, technological, computational innovations, all these sorts of things are an increasingly visible and important part of the scholarly portfolio that a university academic institution is putting forward. One of the sort of peripheral effects felt differently by different constituencies is humanities in the best of worlds don't do a whole lot of stuff that people are going to pay for. With digital tools, aggregation can happen on the part of vendors, and is happening on the part of vendors. It could be happening on the part of libraries, though we haven't figured out how to do that effectively yet. So we are faced with packages, with bundles, with combined content. Notoriously the big deals in journals, where there's this monopoly sort of control of a set of journals, and the sky's the limit in terms of what the prices are and the conditions are under which those materials are made available. But also, Gale Cengage or Alexander Street Press, or some of the smaller outfits that are dealing with humanities, social sciences, other kinds of materials, and they're our pals. They're good people. They're attuned to scholarship. They're kind of hip. They're fun, and they're creating their own aggregations of stuff that we buy. If they can get away with it, they will create those aggregations by sort of wrapping up content that a library owns, putting restrictions on that library's ability to sort of digitize or make available those same materials freely on its own terms. So they're, number one, blocking up content into bundles. Number two, the nice part of it is they're using those bundles as sort of test beds or the databases on which to build tools and platforms and capacities to do stuff across all of those materials within the aggregation that you couldn't do one by one. So even if the libraries sort of said, like we're virtuous, right? So we tell those people, if you want to use our digitized versions of anything that we have, the conditions are that we also can make that stuff freely available, non-exclusive licenses. So we'll digitize it, we'll put it up, or if you digitize it, you give us the copy, we put it up. We're putting it up one by one by one by one. They're putting it up as part of a package. And the package allows people to search across everything within it, to do manipulations across everything within it. So there's a huge amount of value added within that. Aggregation then allows different kinds of scholarship. It also allows distortions of the marketplace. And we don't know how to sort of position ourselves collectively so that we're creating the aggregations, we're creating those value-added products and tools and services, and we're controlling the distribution and the cost structure for it. It's something entirely possible when you look at the number of libraries that are buying any one of these sets. There's a whole ton of money going into these things. Had we the sort of organizational capacity and the resources that we felt we could put into this, we could be creating stuff that's every bit as good or better. But it's not the niche to which we've sort of projected ourselves or aspired to fill. So, we just follow the marketplace and kind of get pulled along the way. All of this presumes and reflects also modernization. So, time was, information was kind of, well, that's just good stuff, and people have it, and they get to it, and they use it, and it allows scholarship and learning and exalted things to happen. People, vendors, others wake up and say, well, this good stuff, somebody's willing to pay for it. And all of a sudden, everything has a dollar sign attached to it. So the notion of information as, information wants to be free, information is a public good, doesn't really float anymore. And you see this in unusual places. So Serra, an Italian sort of aggregator on the make, is scooping up humanities content, in classics journals and medieval studies, and who the hell cares about these things? From Italy and in Italian and European languages, creating packages with on a monopoly base, increasing prices routinely between 30 and 50% a year for these packages. So, this is sort of little small-scale stuff compared to the Elsevier's or the Schringers or something like that. But it's a trend that's immensely scary as you see someone who is in a marketplace that was considered immune from these kinds of price manipulations and pressure, and they're being somewhat successful. And they're, the Italian press thunders against them, and the West people, the Western European Studies section thunder against them, and everybody thunders against them, and they keep sort of, putting out those bills. So it's a phenomenon from which no sector appears to be exempt, and we'll see about that. Finally, open access. The library community's and other communities favored response to exorbitantly priced journal packages and journals that are controlled by monopolistic publishers. The commercial ones are the ones we love to hate, so Elsevier and Springer, and they probably deserve that. You know, profit margins of 30 to 40% year on year, and kind of a mode of operating that's sort of swaggering, and you know, they aren't sufficiently deferential as they're sort of picking their pockets. So a lot of problems there, but it also goes, you know, Oxford, University Press, Cambridge. There are some of the nonprofit outfits that are now Nature Publishing, not a nonprofit, but it's sort of ones that you consider as being among the good guys that are in exactly that same sort of mode of operation as it affects our budgets. So open access, instead of subscription and, you know, charge what the user will bear, we find a way to sort of pay the costs up front and nobody pays after that. So you put it up there and it's available freely to the world. That sounds great. In most cases, you can assume that you'll be able to do away eventually over time as open access works itself out. The model will drive down profit margins even with for-profit publishers that sort of try and move into an open access arena, so Springer's been doing that. And it eventually, therefore, will control the increase in costs, and we'll give everyone access to a broader array of materials in virtuous ways. So something where the third world countries, developing countries, won't be at a disadvantage because they can't afford what it is. Where you know, the big universities and the small universities will all have the same opportunity in their researchers to benefit from the sort of collective knowledge. So, you know, that sounds pretty good, and there's been a lot of promotion, mandates. You know, there's a couple dozen universities in the United States where there's a mandate for faculty to deposit all of their journal articles and their research into the local open access repository, usually with some escape clauses for people where that won't work for one reason or another. These sorts of things. Where it gets tricky, and there are also an increasing number of mandates for open access from funders. So the Wellcome Trust in England, other NIH, more recently the broad federal mandate here. There's a moratorium period that gives some wiggle room. In England, the historians and others have argued that even a one-year sort of waiting period is way too short when you're dealing with those kinds of disciplines where the half-life of a journal article or something is, you know, you measure it in years, if not centuries, rather than, you know, days and months, the way it is in some of the medical and technical fields. So there's a lot of play going on in the specific terms through which open access is constructed and applied in given situations. The bigger question maybe is open access presumes that somebody's going to pay for the costs of publishing upfront. And yeah, you can argue about, you know, how much should it cost to publish an article, and, you know, peer review, is that part of the game? Is it copy editing? How important is that? You know, illustrations and glossy stuff and all these things, how important are those? Many open access publications seem to be coming into the, you know, $2,000, $3,000 per article range to put something out. So that's a fair chunk of money, and some of them are, you know, go up twice that much. So if I am, as a researcher, I'm going to publish something in an open access journal, quite apart from the question, which is a real one, of the impact factor, the value, the importance of that publication, whether it's going to get me tenure, whether it's going to get me a promotion, whether it's going to get me something that I want, related to its visibility and importance by those metrics, is how am I going to pay for this thing? Sometimes a funding source will say, okay, we'll subsidize the open access publication costs. Sometimes the university will say, well, if you're really stuck, we'll help you out. Sometimes there are other kinds of funds sloshing around. It appears in many cases, not all, that the essential source of funds from open access publishing will be the university or the organization that produces the research. So, who are the universities and the organizations that are producing research? They're the research organizations, so the Marylands and the UCLAs and the Chicagos and the Harvards, places like that, are setting themselves up, and this is probably a morally virtuous thing to be doing, but we are setting ourselves up to carry the weight of the scholarly publishing, the scholarly communication for the world on our backs. That could be a kind of expensive proposition, both in a monetary sense and also when we're talking about, thinking about disinvestment. An organization that is shrinking in size and scope and number of staff and sort of purview, the extent of its activities, is an organization that's by definition organizationally in trouble. And that may be, you know, how do they call it, the creative extinction or whatever it is. That's a real process, and it's a legitimate process. It's part of the way the world works. But we probably would want to think a little bit about what the down road implications of open access are going to be for research libraries individually and as a community. If it takes hold and if there's a way to sort of anticipate, shape the process in a way that sort of really does allow the services, you know, we don't deserve to exist just because we've been around for a long time and we're nice people and we deserve to exist, but we provide services that are fundamentally important for the research process, for learning, for teaching, for you know, scholarship, for this whole institutional framework in which we're engaged. If we believe that, and I think we should believe that, then finding ways to ensure our adaptability going forward seems like something we need to do. And I'm not sure that the arguments and the presentation of open access as it's happening right now is giving us that sort of, reflecting that kind of a perspective on what we're about. Final change in many, not all, research libraries has to do with patron-driven acquisitions, demand-driven acquisitions. So this seems to have taken shape most aggressively in the Wild West, where the economies tanked, state economies tanked definitively and earlier than they did other places. And the great spokespersons for it out of Utah, out of Texas, out of Arizona, have been at places where the library budgets and university budgets have been just plain decimated. So if you don't have enough money to do much of anything, how do you make that money, how do you apply that money most effectively when it comes to collections? And one of the logical responses is to say, okay, we're trying to, we, the bibliographers, collection development community, are trying to anticipate what our users are going to want. We don't have enough money to meet those needs, so we make our best guesses. And sometimes we're right, and sometimes we're wrong. So there's a large proportion of what we buy that never gets used, or gets used, you know, over a 50-year time frame. Not for the people who are on campus today trying to do their work. So let's figure out a way where the users say what they want, and we just sort of buy it. It's covered, it's taken care of. So the open access package then is where, you know, a suite of vendor records are preloaded into a system, usually in a way that's transparent to users, so they don't know that this isn't something that they can, whether you own it or not. Often for ebooks, sometimes for print books. Somebody wants something, they click on the catalog, put in a request for it, and that sort of, particularly in the ebook environment, it triggers it, so there it is. Same as some, you know, and you don't need to know whether we own it beforehand, whether we're renting it, whether we're sort of going to be buying it as a result of my interest, of, you know, my click on that title. So it guarantees for that universe of materials that what we're ordering, what the library is acquiring, is what somebody wants and is going to use and has an interest in right now. So it's sort of 100%, you know, foolproof kind of collection development in terms of meeting user needs. No waste. You know, no misses. Whether those misses would have been something down the road that people will want, need, wish they had, is a different question, and in a way it's moot as we go into an age of digital sort of supports for monographs. So if we don't get it today, we can get it tomorrow. We can get it 5 years from now, we can get it 10 years from now. Across the globally, this is becoming the case. It's a long way from being true in other parts of the world, but we're moving toward a time when the digital requirements for storage are such that publishers and aggregators can hold on to stuff indefinitely and make it sort of in print or potentially in print as required. As opposed to the late stages of the print era when tax rules, among other things, meant that you didn't keep an inventory of published volumes. You paid taxes on that. So the idea was you sell it as long as it's going to sell, then you get rid of everything else, and it's gone. It's out of print. And if somebody wants to buy it after that time, tough luck. You know, they find it on the out-of-print market. They find it somehow. That you're sort of hostage to what the vendor is willing or able to include within that. And there are various kinds of exceptions that aren't included in these packages and these sort of arrangements. So are we shortchanging our users by pretending we're offering a comprehensive suite of materials from which they can be choosing, when in fact it's just you know, not even a curated sort of representation subset of that, but an arbitrarily driven by sort of dealers with publishers and, you know, limitations on where they'll hold back the items that might be their best sellers or whatever it might be. So patron-driven acquisitions does things and it doesn't do things, and it's wildly controversial. It feels like it has a place in most research libraries for specifically identified subsets of what they're attempting to support, which has also to do with preservation concerns, with where they want to be or need to be a collection of record, with the scope of coverage, you know, sort of casual reading kinds of stuff. Hey, great. These kinds of things. So that's a element in the landscape now. Finally, as we're thinking about us, librarians, people in all of this structure, how do we understand our own role? How do we train ourselves? How do we stay on top of all of these changes, of all these pressures? How do we keep agency, such agency as we can have within this structure, to sort of be defining and directing what the library may be doing, should be doing, as opposed to just sort of getting, you know, buffeted around by these forces that you know, this is a really depressing list of stuff, right? I mean, you know, God, just let me go back, you know, hide under my desk or something, with the world sort of changing the terms of activity, the terms of engagement for libraries and librarians in what we sort of traditionally assumed was the noblest and most ennobling and most sort of enabling of careers. You know, we're changing people's lives, we're doing wonderful stuff, and now we're just sort of getting smashed around by these currents that the economy and society are pushing on us. So how do we sort of envision ourselves and position ourselves so that we're able to you know, walk out of here with our heads up high and sort of feel like something's going, that we can be shaping this world rather than just sort of affected by it. You think a little bit of some of the other countries, in Cuba, the New Socialist Man, or in China with, you know, Mao's Red Book, and you know, where things come along and everybody sort of we are changed people. We're different. We're fundamentally new. And yeah, then something changes, and no, maybe not. Maybe we're always the sort of the same people, you know, reacting to different sets of stimuli. So those stimuli, that environment within which we're operating and to which we're reacting and responding, is one that we at least partially control. So figuring out how we can sort of assert that ownership and sort of move ahead is, I think, you know, maybe one of the least obvious but most important things that we can be thinking about as we go forward. So lo and behold, the first half hour that was going to be the sort of introductory segment of this has turned into about an hour. So let's do a pause nonetheless for questions, comments, anything like that, and then I want to talk more specifically about what I was supposed to be talking about, which is cooperation. Yeah.
You kind of talk about are going through an existential crisis. What are we going to be able to go forward? How will we go forward? To my experience, there's no one else who's going to be taking our place when it comes to serious research. When I'm trying to find materials, the only place that I'm going to be able to find them is through our libraries. So, you know, I take some solace there that there's a core responsibility that we have. There is a market, it might be small, but, you know, the existential crisis to me is not terribly burning. So I just want to put that out there and see what your response is to that.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think that's true, and that sort of is part of the response to that thing at the very end of, you know, so what is our individual possibility and capacity and vision for where we go on, and it is. If we step up to it, we own roles that are unique to us, and if we can adapt and sort of hold to that understanding of what that unique role is, then yeah, we're bulletproof. You know, we have an indefinite purpose and a valuable purpose. So I agree with you.
Sort of as a follow-up to that, it does seem to me that the larger publishing industry probably looks at scholarly publication as a tiny little niche that they don't have any really great concern about, and that what we really need to do is stress institutional repositories. I think economies of scale will begin to develop as we begin to build these and start linking them together. So I was glad to hear you talk about that, but I also got a sense that you were concerned about the monetary, the feasibility of it. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So the way institutional repositories to date, and I don't think they're bounded by this, the ones that I'm most aware of, it's kind of anything that we're producing locally, dump it in here and we'll sort of curate it and we'll make it available. Anything that you produce initially tends to be faculty articles and sometimes monographs, sometimes publications that are sort of second-tier publications within a university structure. So if a department is publishing a journal or working papers or something like that, that sort of stuff, eventually it can spill into student electronic theses and dissertations can get put in there. Sometimes senior papers or senior theses, this sort of thing. It's the way I perceive it at the present point in time, it's sort of the analogous to the traditional library collecting mode of there's a book, let's grab it, there's a journal, let's grab it, there's something else, let's grab it and put it in, without having the sort of layers of value-added stuff, even less in the case of institutional repositories than in libraries where you do have the infrastructure, intellectual infrastructure allowed by classification systems and by standardized, metadata systems and schemata and that sort of stuff, to allow users and people to work across it. Institutional repositories, as I've seen them too often, are, yeah, if I know the name of an article or the name of somebody, and ideally, going through Google or some meta search thing, or if I know what repository, where that person is, I can go and find that nugget, that atom, that piece. But I don't, at this point in time, by and large, have the ability to sort of conduct a really robust search for all of the literature that has to do with whatever I care about. That's going to sort of effectively extract things from a whole suite of institutional repositories. You can get, archive or some of the disciplinary repositories that allow that kind of crosstalk between institution-based sort of collections of information and discipline or topically focused collections of information. And we'll get there. But to my mind, we haven't sort of cracked that yet. And that's, one of the big pieces that requires sort of community action, I think, as well as the sort of local awareness of what needs to happen. With open access journals, again, the journal landscape is curious these days because you have journals per se, and they carry their own sort of reputation, their impact factors that are associated with journals. You want to publish in these journals, those journals are sort of secondary. So there's reputation associated with journals. There are also communities that are associated with journals. So if you're a sociologist, you've got your suite of journals, and you know what the reputation is within those. So the journals per se carry value. They sort of add value, and they create communities. Then you can also look at the level of the specific articles that comprise those journals. And the way many of the search and discovery systems work these days, they don't care about journals. It's if you're looking for articles about some disease or about some phenomenon, you put in that topic and you get a list of whatever those articles. And it's irrelevant what journals they come from. The article is the meaningful entity. So there's an entirely different structure of value and sort of expectation of results when you're sort of going after the things. How we sort of reconcile then the kind of cross-field searching that one would like to see with institutional repositories, with the values that are associated with journals as journals, and with this sort of atomistic array of articles and other pieces of scholarship that are kicking around and that need to be combined regardless of their source.
So we have, yeah, for instance, it strikes me that a lot of the problems that you describe have to do in some way with the tension between an idea of a library as a place that's universal. In some ways, it's a source of universal information, and that that's no longer quite the case, certainly, but we're still trying to think of ourselves in that way. And is there some way out of this, out of the challenges, the problems that we face that has to do with actually going towards greater specialization, in spite of the fact that might mean that we serve fewer clients? That strikes me as one way to go. But that's also, I realize, for a lot of librarians, that's very contentious because the notion that we serve everyone equally is very deeply ingrained in the sort of culture of the profession.
Yeah. So that's great. Wonderful question, partly because it's a segue into the last 12 minutes. So Harvard, the Ivy League schools are all of them
we're the new kids on the block, members of a consortium called Borrow Direct. So there's a organizational group, the Ivies Plus, which is the Ivy League schools, plus MIT, plus Stanford and Chicago and Johns Hopkins. And they get together, and the provosts get together and talk about important things. There's a library sort of rump group that sort of is associated with that. And those libraries that are physically within the Northeast are the Borrow Direct Consortium. The main service that Borrow Direct offers is user-initiated interlibrary loan, expedited interlibrary loan that allows a user to decide that he or she wants something that's held somewhere within a consortium. There's a unified catalog for this. To, from his or her machine, request that and have it without intermediation by the local interlibrary loan stuff. It goes straight to the library that has it, is delivered straight to that library. The turnaround time is supposed to be 4 days. Person gets a notice, goes picks it up, and there it is. When you look at that, there's the traffic patterns for Borrow Direct, and this has been going for, with the veteran institutions, I don't know, 7 years or so. There's a sort of bifurcated, bipolar kind of response pattern. So one is the common stuff, trade books, academic press books, English language books that somebody has charged out locally or isn't available locally even though it's in the collection, or something that's easy to get, that's common. And we don't have the modeling that would say exactly how much is enough but not too much. But for example, if we did studies of university press books by university press, how many Yale University press books, how often are those books consulted by users over a given suite of universities? There may be groups because of geography or institutional pride or whatever where those would sit higher. If you were in California, it might be how many UC books are getting this kind of use. It feels like you could establish an average number. And there are going to be outliers, of course. But what we were saying before about how books don't go out of print the same way, if you find you need more copies, order some more copies. That's what we do locally by and large. If we find something that's getting very heavy demand, we've got people backed up, dozens of people waiting to use a particular book, buy some more and then sort of let people have it. So within a consortial level, you could sort of monitor for it and correct for the cases where the average doesn't work. But in the case of Borrow Direct, we got 10 libraries. If we find out we need 6 or 5 copies of your run-of-the-mill average university press book, then maybe every one of us doesn't need to be buying it because we think, hey, we're a Harvard, we're a Brown, we're whoever we are. Of course our collection is going to have that book, and it would be an embarrassment as well as a disservice to our users if we didn't. So if we can spread out that sort of access to and reliance on a limited number of copies of the common stuff, then we can get the materials, and whatever those materials may be, or develop the services, or do something else that's going to expand accessibility for other folks. When Maryland moves into CIC, they're talking about these similar kinds of programs. I don't know that they have the sort of an exactly analogous thing, but these are sorts of possibilities that one might explore that can do that. The question, one of the questions still is, even if all the libraries in the world got together, would there be enough, is that aggregation big enough to make a difference in terms of the marketplace and the sort of production of knowledge and these kinds of things? So when we're thinking about cooperative programs and activities, part of it is what we can do with the resources that we have, and there's a lot. And you look at the various programs that are out there. The other model for programs would be something like Center for Research Libraries,
HathiTrust or some of the others, where a number of participating libraries put money into a central, somewhat autonomous organization that then goes out and does good things that that community sort of wants to see done, but no member of that community will be able to pull off on their own. So with CRL, there's a lot of stuff with global resources. There are other kinds of activities that it could be done. The organizational capacity to pull off these kind of community programs is something that is not fully developed now, and it's not clear whether and how we can put it together. There are all sorts of reasons for that, I think. One is that, yeah, we research libraries are pals and buddies, and we want to work together. We're also in institutions that are competing with each other. You know, if I let, imagining in the borrowed direct scenario where we're talking about, well, you know, we'll take Urdu and you take Pashtun or something like that in languages and like that. Well, if I want to build a program in Afghan studies and I've given away our Pashtun collection and it's in someplace else, then those scholars, or I want to, the university, the faculty want to sort of hire in a professor there, and we got nothing. So what's the appeal for a faculty person to come here rather than going down to the collection that has that? So there's all sorts of institutional crossplay and interplay that affects how this plays out. There's a question of free riders. If the big libraries, you know, top 25, top 20, 50 of the ARL libraries, so that's you know, we're all in this. If we're providing access to building up collections that are unique and the rest of the world, particularly in a digital environment, then the only thing that matters these days is digital, so that's where we're headed with our materials as soon as we can crack intellectual property restrictions where they apply, and if they don't apply, then we're there already, at least aspirationally. So why, in a way, this is analogous to the open access question. Can we carry the weight of the research library community of the whole scholarly world on our back? You know, if Maryland has the Prang collection, digitizes all that stuff, puts in the resources to make that available over time, puts in the resources to make that more vital, to build it up, to sort of push out the boundaries, to make it something that's useful to and attractive and appealing and used by that many more people, then is Maryland alone in a condition to provide the staff, the support, the servers, the, you know, whatever else it takes to keep that out there? You know, as a flagship, unique service, the specialized kind of thing that you know, is already in place. Or you say, hey, you know, we need to collect the tax from the people who are benefiting from this and are just sort of sliding along. And the libraries, that, you know, these Wild West libraries that are reduced not by their own desire to being pretty much patron-driven acquisitions, and otherwise we get it from somebody out there. Is that equitable? Can the system sustain that? What organizational structure will allow us to feel like that's a viable way to proceed forward? So resources and organization, and then the sort of models of intellectual property and sort of what obstacles there are to making things available freely. And there, you know, that's a different kind of community mobilization, which we mutter about and try and solve through our own devices. But it's something that needs to happen in order to move things ahead. And then thinking of what's the scale of cooperation. So borrowed, you're right, you know, that's a little region in the United States. CIC, that's another sort of slightly more sprawling region in the United States. There's a world out there. How do we hook up with national libraries, with international agencies, with you know, UNESCO, with Europeana, with these other massive programs that are convergent in terms of their goals, and where, you know, when we're thinking about how to satisfy mass needs as well as the sort of specialized needs, we can't do that without mobilizing the full community of libraries and of sort of players in the scholarly communications arena. And there, we just barely have a clue. You know, there's IFLA would perhaps be an organization, but its history means that it would need some fundamental sort of reorientation in order to be able to carry that kind of a load. Maybe there are other organizations that could do that. So when we're thinking about the future of cooperation, ultimately, it's digital. That's how people are doing their work. There's, you know, when students say if it's not digital, it doesn't exist. That's a real phenomenon. It doesn't mean that the other stuff doesn't have value, but in order to sort of energize that value, it has to become available in a digital format. And that then has this whole trailing array of intellectual property regimes and other kinds of considerations, as well as the resources to digitize stuff and curate things that are available more digital and sort of understand that universe. It's international, and that means that we have to be thinking internationally globally in terms of, you know, this is going back to the first stuff when I was talking about the environment. In a global environment, when we have students who are doing research, something like the environment, something like food, something like crime, something like international movements of population, something like movements of finance and development and business, and all these sorts of things, none of those are meaningful within the framework of the United States. These are global phenomena. If we want to be moving forward, anticipating where research is going, where our students need to be going, even if all we're trying to do is train them to be good employees somewhere. These are all global phenomena. We need to have that globalization and internationalization pervade everything that we do in the services that we provide in our activities. So we're 3 minutes over. Who wants to ask any questions? Who dares to ask a question? Yeah.
I'm new to libraries, and about a year and a half, and in that time, what I hear frequently is how we are so subject to, we have no negotiating leverage with publishers. We are getting our pockets picked. We give them material and then buy it back from them. And I'm just wondering what the barriers are when we talk about partnership. What is stopping major, heavily resourced research universities from cooperating on a publishing venture that goes beyond a university press and buy out somebody, like Cengage, for example? I'm just throwing a name out. They're already established, they have journals that are respected, and then use the leverage of all these major universities on the board, so on, direct policies. You have some monetization, you have stratified open access, so that we are not carrying the world on our backs. There is some kind of monetary value to what we're doing, but just kind of getting around the whole pocket picking thing. You know, it's just, I mean, we have enormous resources in scholarly production. Why aren't we also controlling the accessibility and the publishing of that?
Yeah, so that's kind of a stumper. You know, we've had some conversations at Harvard, other places have done this as well as, so let's set up, you know, the Ivy League open access journal and you know, any number of things. And it gets little traction for reasons that aren't at all clear. There are small-scale efforts. You know, there are a lot of places where the university press is sort of in closer partnership, or in some cases it's actually moved in with the library. But that still is a different kind of phenomenon, and they're sort of, the university presses seem to follow a traditional logic of at least not costing the institution much more than they want to provide in extraordinary subventions. But yeah, this feels like a kind of venture that makes no sense. The two cases that are closest to that are archive. So that's the preprint depository and high energy physics and some computer science and those sorts of things, where it was run on a shoestring. Now they've sort of are using a set of institutional subscribers to subsidize the thing with Cornell, which is the host institution, still covering the largest share of the costs. And that's hugely used by the high energy physics community and those sorts of folks. The other one example that comes to mind also in high energy physics is Scope 3, which is the sponsoring coalition for open access publications in particle physics, or something like that. So this is a worldwide effort that was sort of championed by CERN, the European physics community. They have the Hadron Collider in France, Switzerland, to basically buy out the 7 or 8, 10 most important journals in high energy physics. Elsevier, Springer, Royal Society, there's the American Institute of Physics, so it's a mixture of publishers. Those small number of journals concentrate something like 85 and 90% of the literature in the field. So what CERN wants to do is buy them out, make them open access publications, have participating institutions pay no more and over time theoretically less than they're paying now for subscriptions to those journals, so on and so forth. And they're now at the, they've been going at this for the past 5 years trying to put together the coalition. They started out knocking on doors in Europe where there's a single national agency for science and technology, and somebody would pull out their checkbook and say, sure, that sounds great. So this was the model they expected when they got to the States, which accounts for the largest single share of the funding package they need to put together in order to be able to pull out this buyout of other journals. And so they went hunting for the door to knock on that would sort of give them this unified thing, and no. So they've been knocking on the thousands of university doors over the past several years, and are theoretically at the point of putting together the US part of the package, which will then allow them to go through an elaborate, they've had sort of bids and tenders and RFPs and things like that to pull this off. So that feels, it's a sort of convoluted roundabout way to get at something similar to the same thing, where it's been working with libraries but also with the research communities, the high energy physics community, to make something like that happen. But it does, it seems like that's exactly the sort of place where and model that we'd want to be pursuing.